has the balance moved from what I think was largely ideological motivations for a long time during the Cold War, and a sort of spirit of communism versus capitalism, American ideals versus Soviet ideals, or there was real ideological tension there. Has that sort of moved to identity or financial motivations? And we can expand this to not just Russian, but also Chinese.
Sure. Well, I guess first thing I'd say is depends on whose perspective you're talking from, right? So, when you go back and look at the research, and there's been some really neat research done on individuals recruited to work for foreign intelligence agencies in the U.S. Over since 47-ish, right? So the bulk of the Cold War, very few of them were ideologically motivated.
And mostly financial,
mostly financially motivated. Only few had the payouts of the Nicholsons and the Ames of the world, though. And even then, some of the cases we've heard as recently as, earlier this year, some of those were tiny amounts of money. $5,000 or $20,000 that somebody betrayed intended to betray the nation for. Very few folks got the millions that an Aldrich Ames or an Harold Nicholson got.
Yeah, I think back to when I was, in maybe middle school or early high school, I read a book about a Navy intelligence officer who, he's in prison to this day, I believe. And I'm blanking on his name right now, but a long time handing over nuclear secrets, submarine secrets, all this stuff. And
I know the case you're talking about.
Yeah, the sums that he talked about in that book as a, 12, 13, 14-year-old were like, oh, man, that's a lot of money. As an adult, I look at some of these, like you said, something like, God, people are willing to take on the risk of doing this, betray their nation, sure, but also just the personal risk of getting into what is a pretty unsavory business, being a spy. They're willing to take that on for what really doesn't even get you a new car.
Right.
Off the lot, not even a down payment for a house in most places of the country at this point.
Right. Now, interestingly, at that same time that Americans were motivated by money and being recruited, through financial incentives, that most of the Russians that we were recruiting were actually motivated by ideological motivations. Right. They so hated communism that they were willing to undermine the system. They thought of themselves truly as patriots for Russia in order to undermine communism. Yeah. And so really that discussion of motivation kind of depends on which side of the table you're on. And I guess it's simplistic to think motivations are just one motivation anyway. Almost everybody is a mix of motivations, right? Yeah,
that makes sense. Humans are complex.
Yeah. Ames was equal parts venal. He wanted money. And egotistical. He felt so disrespected inside the agency that he wanted to prove that he was better than other people. Well, if you're, a case officer of any sort and you've got somebody presenting that way, gosh, that gives you a lot of hooks to hang things on.
Yeah. And thinking about how things may have changed now, it's interesting how it was and where the world was then and where it is now. I wouldn't be surprised if what we saw was almost a flip of those two, because I imagine if you're in Russia right now, one of your biggest concerns is maybe not ideological, but it is monetary.
Yeah.
Money's a very serious problem over there. Whereas here in the United States, with identity politics being so driven right now, so many people that are so divided that it might not be that difficult for somebody to make an ideologically motivated decision to betray their country. Yeah, if they believe, think about it right now, how many people are vehemently against the current administration? And look, there's plenty of reasons for somebody to be upset with the current administration, and there's plenty of reasons for people that support the current administration to support it. I can imagine a world where if you are just vehemently opposed to the current administration, that you might say, you know what, I'm going to do everything I can to undermine it, just like that spy did in Russia to undermine the communist system.
It's interesting. I don't disagree with you. Like if I were a Russian case officer in DC right now, that would absolutely be an area I would pursue. Although I don't know that I would try and do it as a Russian.
Yeah.
Right. I think at some level, even those who would be most opposed to the current administration and in positions where they would have information of interest to, a foreign intelligence service, would stop at actively providing assistance to Russia or China. Mm-hmm. I think most people would. So then if I were to follow that line of logic, it's maybe make sense for somebody to come up with another approach to those same people, leveraging the same negative motivation, but concealing where it's actually going, or at least giving them enough of a fig leaf to hide behind.
Just because of the ways people are so divided right now. I think we are at a really unique inflection point in U.S. history, world history, with the way media, social media, everything has driven division. And I think it's probably presenting a lot of very unique opportunities if you're a case officer for any country.
Absolutely. No, I'd agree with that completely. I think for sure it's a target-rich environment in that regard. Mm-hmm. I don't fundamentally think people have changed, right? But I think the environment has changed. Mm-hmm. And therefore how people react to it is what's changing a lot. And so, people's motivations are their motivations, right? We used to talk about the four primary motivations as money, ideology, coercion, and ego, the acronym MICE. I still think that those are the basis level of motivations that you can, apply to folks. But how they react to the world around them is what's changed, or how quickly they may go to them has changed. The speed of information, the dopamine hits everybody gets from social media, that's changing people. But I don't know that their core motivations have changed.
It's really interesting stuff, and I'm anxious to read the sort of the textbooks, the studies 20, 30 years from now that look back at this time.
I will say the other thing that's interesting is I believe that we kind of apply rules to ourselves as Western intelligence agencies that, Russia and China and Iran and North Korea and some of those others that are active in the space don't apply, right? And so there are civil liberties that we, respect, and there'll be folks that disagree with me on that, and that's okay. Mm-hmm. But generally, there are these rules that we follow and that we apply in what we're willing to do. That Russia and China and some of the other bad actors from our perspective apply that they don't hold in the same stead. And as examples of that are, the Chinese have written into law that any overseas Chinese is required to actively respond to queries from Chinese intelligence by providing any information. They don't view a Chinese overseas Chinese who's taken citizenship in another nation as being any less Chinese. They still think of that individual as being Chinese and having responsibilities and requirements to report back to China when asked, whether that person agrees to it or not.
Yeah.
And they're willing to apply pressure on that person's family still back in China in order to secure their agreement. They're willing to coerce in ways that we are unwilling to do because of the culture that we've created in our nation and the rules that we've placed upon ourselves. So there's some interesting stuff, tools in their toolboxes that we just aren't willing to apply as we're going out into the threats of this world.